This is Green Street with Patti and Doug Wood, the environmental health show and podcast, keeping you up to date on what in the world is happening and what you need to know to protect yourself and your family in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. Some people call it sick building syndrome. Some call it environmental illness. Doctors often refer to it as idiopathic environmental intolerance. Most people who suffer from it simply call it MCS, multiple chemical sensitivity. The symptoms of MCS can range from mildly annoying, like my symptoms when I'm exposed to heavy fragranced laundry products or perfumes, to completely debilitating, like my friend in Colorado who is basically confined to his apartment because pretty much everything triggers massive headaches and other symptoms that make life almost impossible. On our show today, we'll be joined by a medical doctor and one of her patients who will talk about MCS and how it impacts their lives. That's coming up here on Green Street, but first, Patti, you teased us last week about an article you had on tattoos. I'm assuming this is not going to be good news for anybody that already has a tattoo?
No, it's actually pretty alarming. 32% of Americans have at least one tattoo.
Really?
Yeah, and 22% have multiple tattoos. That's 22%.
It's a quarter of the population.
Yeah. But as tattoos have become more widespread and more common, so too has the incidence of malignant lymphoma. So, is there a connection? The study analyzed data from nearly 12,000 people aged 20 to 60, and they matched it with a control group of people same age and sex without lymphoma, and people with tattoos had a 21% higher risk of developing any type of lymphoma after adjusting for other factors.
Wow.
A tattoo, regardless of its size, will trigger a low-grade inflammation in the body, which in turn can trigger cancer. It's all about inflammation. Okay, because once that tattoo is in your body, your immune system attempts to clean out the ink particles and that it perceives as something that's foreign and shouldn't be there.
Well, it is foreign.
Yes, it is.
And it shouldn't be there.
Yes. So, I mean, there have been quite a few studies published on this. They had one in 2022 that identified toxic substances in the tattoo inks and warned that they could pose toxicological risk to human health. And so the study from Sweden added to this previous work, that was linking tattoos to increased cancer risk. And then in 2023, American Association for Cancer Research annual meeting identified a potential link between having 3 or more large tattoos and higher risks of blood cancers, myeloid neoplasms, which is bone marrow cancers, and lymphoma. So they're all going in that direction, the bone marrow and blood cancers that we're seeing that are associated with tattoos.
Wow.
Certain ink colors have been tied to cancer risks. Black and red inks were associated with increased risks of deadly skin cancers like melanoma, basal cell carcinoma. I immediately sent this to our daughters to make sure that our grandchildren never get tattooed. But
I worry about the athletes that I see. They're just completely tattooed,
covered.
both arms, necks.
Covered. Nobody's talking about the health risks. Who knows when they put all those inks underneath your skin into that subcutaneous tissue?
Well, it certainly stands to
that your immune system is going to go nuts and say, wait, what's this stuff?
Yeah.
What's this
stuff?
stuff?
How did this get here, and how do we get rid of it?
And it triggers this low-grade inflammation, and we know that inflammatory processes actually can trigger cancers. Yeah.
All right, so I have news about a new study showing that the people who live in Cancer Alley, that's that 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River, which is lined with more than 150 petrochemical facilities, these people are exposed to more than a lifetime's exposure to a known cancer-causing compound called ethylene oxide.
Right.
Yeah. So in February 23, Johns Hopkins University researchers measured the ambient ethylene oxide that's in the air in Cancer Alley, and previous studies have found that the residents are in the top 10% of exposure to air toxins related to cancer and are more likely than people living elsewhere to develop prostate, lung, and breast cancer. It's unbelievable that this is still going on and we're not finding some solution for these people. The report found ethylene oxide measurements were 9 times higher than previously estimated by the U.S. EPA. How come the U.S. EPA wasn't down there doing the research? How come it was people from Johns Hopkins? I don't understand. Anyway, the EPA notes that lifetime cancer risks should not exceed 10 parts per trillion, and yet the study measured an average of 31 parts per trillion. In some cases, particularly those close to the fence lines of these facilities, the number grew to 140 parts per trillion. That's in the ambient air. Ethylene oxide is a colorless gas used to make chemicals and resins. It's considered a known carcinogen by the EPA. Now, the EPA doesn't easily classify something as a known carcinogen.
No, it takes a long time.
This is a really bad chemical. And they're measuring the air where these people live at 140 parts per trillion instead of 10 parts per trillion.
Right, and I bet most of the people who live in Cancer Alley are working at those plants, are working at those facilities.
So they're getting it all day and all night. These are primarily minority communities.
Yep.
These are not wealthy communities.
It's an environmental justice issue times 1,000 or more.
Concentrations of ethylene oxide are expected to drop sometime in the future, according to the EPA.
How's that going to happen?
In April of this year, the EPA updated its regulations related to hazardous air pollutants that aim to reduce cancer risk and air pollution at 200 chemical facilities. Will the EPA's new standards be undone by a new administration? Who knows?
Of course they will.
You know?
You deregulate, deregulate, deregulate.
Yeah, we want
That's
deregulation.
how you make money.
We have these job-killing regulations.
That's right.
It's better that people have jobs and then we kill them.
Well, it's not just the job-killing regulations, but when they have to put in extra filters and smokestack scrubbers and all those kinds of things to keep these things out of the air, it costs them more money, so their bottom line is smaller.
That's right. We don't like regulations. We don't like things that get in the way.
And clearly, those industries don't like people.
Let us just pollute the air. Well, you know, people are expendable. You can get more people. More people will come, get a job. Anyway, that's the news from Cancer Alley. This is Green Street with Patti and Doug Wood, or the Good News Show, as we like to call it. We'll be right back. We live in a world increasingly filled with chemicals. We eat them, we drink them, we spray them around our homes or apartments, we wash our dishes and clothes in them. They're in our cars, our buses, trains, airplanes. They're in the fabric of our sofa and the housing of our computers and TVs. Chemicals are in everything, everywhere, all the time. So if you're one of the growing number of people who are sensitive to chemicals, the world can be a very difficult place to navigate. Today on Green Street, we're delighted to speak with Dr. Ann McCampbell and Susie Molloy, both of whom have multiple chemical sensitivity, or MCS. We started our conversation asking Dr. McCampbell to define MCS for us.
It's a medical condition where somebody becomes sensitized to chemicals and has a kind of variety of reactions, not necessarily typical poisoning or toxic reactions. And, you know, there is a published consensus definition that was published in 1999 that really still holds, where MCS is defined as a chronic condition involving multiple organ systems in which low-level exposures to multiple chemically unrelated substances cause symptoms. And these symptoms improve or resolve when a person is no longer exposed to these chemicals.
So what kinds of things can trigger an MCS event?
Things that provoke, reactions are often perfume, pesticides, car exhaust, smoke of any kind, asphalt and new building materials and stuff like that. And then symptoms often are, headache, fatigue, body aches, dizziness, irregular heartbeat, can have shortness of breath and respiratory problems. Metallic taste in the mouth is, in a way, pretty telling. Don't really get that with much of anything else. And sometimes because of kind of altered brain chemistry, people can have emotional outbursts and things like that. And the way I conceive of this is that it is a neurological problem. I do believe it's the limbic kindling, that's part of the brain. And it's almost like a seizure in that some small trigger sets off something. There's some cycle that gets going, and usually it is from a chemical exposure or collection of exposures that kind of sets the scene for having the sensitization situation. And then tiny amounts, either from breathing it in, ingesting it, can come through the skin, can be injected, could be, medications and foods or chemicals as well. And then it sets off a reaction. research-wise, the thing that's most consistent amongst people that are chemically sensitive is inflammatory markers in the blood. It's usually a chronic problem. I always was impressed by somebody who said emphatically he was completely cured of MCS twice.
It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
We had a pretty large recording studio, and there was probably about, 40 or 50 feet from the front door to someone's office who had chemical sensitivity. And literally, a person would walk in the door who had some kind of perfume or, something on their bodies, a hairspray or something. And he said that he could taste it. He could actually taste it and smell that thing so strongly the minute they walked in the door. I mean, they were like 3 feet in the door and he was like 50 feet away and he could smell it. I mean, the sensitivity, is that acute? Is that a crazy story? Or?
It is, but probably the really important thing is to realize that this is not about the smell of the chemical. That's just your early warning system that lets you know that some bad chemicals are in the air. Because it's not like we can put, clothespins on our nose and go about and live a natural, regular life. And it's always been the case that some chemically sensitive people have lost their sense of smell, but, they're still sick if they're in a room full of perfume. And it's pretty fascinating because with COVID, we had chemically sensitive people who got COVID and lost their sense of smell. Of course, did absolutely nothing for reducing their chemical sensitivity. So I always liked to point that out.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
The taste thing, that you taste things when it's in the bloodstream. And, because that's what happens when you're breathing in an air pollutant. It goes into the lungs, it goes into the blood, it goes everywhere. And it particularly goes to the brain. And I think, that's what initiates a lot of the chemical sensitivity symptoms. But when it's circulating through your tongue, your taste buds can pick it up.
Fascinating.
Susie, let me bring you into the conversation here. Tell us a little bit about your own situation with your sensitivity.
I've had this illness to the point that it was disabling since 1981. And it's been most of my adult life that I've been living it, thinking about it, angry with it, trying to cope with it. And one of the ways I've found to think about it is that at this point, I'm in remission. It's taken decades to get into remission, taken 40 some odd years, I think. At this point, I can drive and I can go into some buildings and I'm pretty flexible. And I'm so grateful for that. I don't think I'm ever going to consider myself well. I don't think that's an option. I think that if your gene pool is such that you're prone, then you remain prone. We can't really switch our genes or our parentage or our former exposures. So remission's great. You get to go into remission by great care over a long period of time. I don't know of people who I believe are cured. I just don't think I don't think it happens.
We have some friends who suffer pretty serious MCS, and their MCS seemed to be triggered by a particular event. Was that the case with you, or did this come on gradually over time?
I think in my situation that there were symptoms as far back as childhood, and they just they were inconvenient, aggravating, interruptive, annoying, frightening sometimes, but they weren't disabling until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And then that's when the bottom fell out for me. But it's very common for people in retrospect to realize that they did have some inkling early on. It may be grade school, maybe when they were tiny children, maybe in a workplace. But it sometimes does take a real big exposure, like a leak from a train or a new carpet in the workplace or a dental experience that goes wrong or the wrong medication, all sorts of things can be the final trigger that puts you over the edge.
So we have this friend who was actually working on a golf course as a young 18, 17 or 18 years old, and he was spraying a pesticide. I think it was malathion, but I'm not sure. And the hose broke, and it just covered him. I mean, in his face, and from that moment on,
Yeah.
he has suffered, and he is now in his 60s, and it doesn't function really at all. And, all foods are, highly, he's highly allergic to almost every food that he tries to eat. I mean, it's just, can you talk a little bit about that, about how foods, are also part of this, but also as a second part of that, is the way that we eat with so many highly processed foods that have gone through so many chemical processes, is it getting worse? Are there more people with MCS now than there were a decade ago or 2 decades ago, Anne?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions that you just
I know, sorry about that.
Patty likes to ask
We'd like to give-
multifaceted questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
1,
Yeah.
2, 3, all in one.
Pick what you want to answer.
Interesting. I mean, Ann Steineman done a lot of epidemiological surveys and prevalence surveys showing like 23% of the population in the US, she's also done them in other countries, now say that they're reactive to common chemicals. And 10 years prior, she had done essentially the same study, and it was like 11%. So, it could be that it's actually the prevalence of some chemical sensitivities, not necessarily the disabling form, but, that people are noticing that may have doubled like in the last 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
The other question was about crud and food, is kind of what I got. I think, yes, oftentimes people start their career in multiple chemical sensitivity after all the things that Susie said, a carpet or, some exposure. But I think the general theory is that that can be the thing there's the straw that broke the camel's back, that people kind of tolerate, exposures in their lifetime, and they tolerate it and they tolerate it. Then there's one more that just sets things off. So the amount of like contaminants in food would contribute to somebody's risk of sort of coming down with this. I think pesticides is really key for the chemical sensitivity thing. And we're all exposed to those in all sorts of various ways. And then again, something tips the scale. For me, I sort of slowly wound down and was having more trouble with food. And eventually the event that just put me over the top was actually eating some supposedly hypoallergenic protein powder. So, and that just shot my circuits. I just felt like somebody had ripped the skin off of my brain, and every little molecule that went by, I was reacting to, where the week before I wasn't.
So, Susie, you mentioned that you were able to drive now and you're able to go to a store now. What was it like before?
Isolation, fear, not knowing if I was going to get better or worse. The isolation was, I think, the worst of it for me. Even, that was way worse than the pain or impairments physically. It was not knowing what the future would be and feeling so alone. And what saved me was support groups, finding out that there were a lot of people who had this disease. I'd never heard of it in my life before I was disabled by it. At this point, the focus of my work is attempting to help people with their rehabilitation. Lots of times that includes getting some stamina and flexibility back. It doesn't include getting so-called well. It includes things like figuring out how to make do with what we have. Just like if you had broken legs, you would learn to function with different kinds of appliances or assistive technology, or you change your expectations about what's going to be possible in your life, and you would learn to cope with it or not. And I think we're the same way. We are going to have our environment become very, very unwelcoming to us. And then we have to make alterations in our own lives and what we do where we go, who we want to be friends with, even what we expect of standard setting agencies, and learn to be on our own in decision making. And I think that's so key. But the rehab component is the one that I see as a place where I do have something to offer. And it's of value to some people and not necessarily others. If they're still going through the stage where they think there's a medical cure, they won't be interested in the skills I've developed, or they won't see a value to it. It looks pretty meager, the way that I've learned to live and my relationships with people. It matters a great deal to me, the rehabilitation part.
A lot of people who suffer from this say that their family members don't understand it, that they think maybe it's all in your head and that it's not really a physical thing that you are feeling or suffering from. Do a lot of the people that you work with and I don't want to say hang out with, but have stories about family members like that?
More commonly than not. So some of us have family members who decided eventually that if we were going to be a functioning family at all, that we would have to learn some respect for what was happening to my body. Just like if you have a family of mountain climbers or hikers or water skiers, and one person in the family can't do that anymore, included in some things.
Right.
And I know some of us have family members who had enough experience with this so they could look back and say, my great aunt had that, and we didn't know what to make of it. Yeah. Or your cousin had something like that. And, she ran away. She left home as a young woman and we never saw her again. Just story after story after story of families that had some big hints in advance. And one of the things I think I would love to see happen for us, and like I said, medically help would be wonderful, but I think we could do quite a bit with troubleshooting in advance of someone being disabled. If there were early warning signs or symptoms that we respected as being pretty blatant and clear forerunners of this disease, the way it is for people with diabetes, you say somebody's thirsty all the time, they dropped an enormous amount of weight. This and that symptoms start to be pertinent, and somebody at the drugstore or the family member, or someone is going to, or reading an article, someone is going to say, gee, I wonder if you should get checked for diabetes. I've heard that can start this way. And that is a heck of a lot better, even though it could be thought of as bad news. That's way better than amputations and visual impairment later, and being on dialysis and things like that. If you can get a jump on it early and admit the seriousness of your symptoms and don't stop looking, for answers for it, I think we would be able to stop an awful lot of the disabling condition. It doesn't have to get as bad as it gets, for your friends or mine or Ann's patients or any of the people we know who've just been devastated by it. There's a social phenomenon that goes with actually quite a number of disabilities. And for us, it's very pronounced at this stage because our medical answers and our diagnostic answers are so few, they're so scant. The different things we can count on for a lot of people is stages of demise. You don't feel well, you can't go into work. Your spousal type significant other says you are no fun. What's going on here? God. You can't argue with anybody about that. You're no fun. You're not having fun. Everything hurts. You lose your job. You lose your household. You lose your social connection. You can't go to synagogue or church or chanting or whatever it is that you used to enjoy doing for comradeship. That's out the window. It's gone. And you are socially very mobile at that point, downward It's triggers downward mobility and stigma and class bias. Most of us are women. An awful lot of us are middle-aged. And all of a sudden, all the tricks that we used to do to try to be more appealing, or, little cosmetic tricks or clothing tricks, or the kinds of things that we used to do to be appealing, those are shot. They're gone. Those are just no longer available tools. There's a lot of things are like that. A number of us have had the experience of having to have a friend come in and take all our clothes and our books and our toys from childhood, or whatever it is that we've been dragging around for years that we think means I'm me and I'm still the same me as I've always been. That stuff's out of the house and probably given away. It's gone. It's just very isolating in that way. For me, it meant I couldn't go to clubs anymore. I couldn't go hear music anymore. I had to drop out of school, quite a number of things. And I had to rebuild who I am with no props, really. And what I had to work with was friends with the same disease. And we bonded very, very thoroughly to the roots. We're so reliant on each other.
Yeah.
Wow, this is very, very powerful. We're almost done, but Anne, did want to ask you, if you could snap your fingers and make it the way it should be, what would that look like?
Wow. Well, first of all, MCS is accepted as a real illness. And actually, I do put a plug in for my booklet I sell, which is an introductory booklet on multiple chemical sensitivities that some people do give to their doctors or their employers or their family members that helps them, to understand it. Mm. And basically, I'm just reminded of the bullet points I have at the end, which is others, the hope for the future is fourfold. Others will learn from people with MCS that many products commonly used today are not safe and will make efforts to reduce them from the environment. This will reduce the chance others will get sick and make the world more accessible for people with MCS. That MCS will become more widely accepted as a disability, and chemically sensitive people will more easily receive disability benefits, as well as accommodations they need to obtain safe housing, stay in the workplace, and participate in as many areas of life as possible. That MCS will be more widely acknowledged by the medical profession as real, as in a physiologic illness, and people with MCS will receive compassionate and appropriate treatment that is covered by medical insurance. And last but not least, more effective treatments will be developed. On my website, you can purchase the booklet, and my website is McCampbellMD.com. I have a lot of information there about MCS. I have some videos, and that's a place to start.
Dr. Ann McCampbell and her patient Susie Molloy here on Green Street, talking about multiple chemical sensitivity, or MCS. Dr. McCampbell's website again is www.annmccambellmd.com. That's Ann with no E, McCampbellMD.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Green Street. Please join us next week and tell your friends about Green Street. We're trying to build our audience here so more people know about these subjects. I'm Doug Wood. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of the show. Thanks for listening.